Dom thought losing the wedding was the worst of it. He had no idea she was just getting started. Paige Miller had been the most powerful real estate heiress on the planet for exactly 31 days. In those 31 days, she had not given a single interview. She had not posted on social media. She had not been photographed at a restaurant, an event, or an airport. She had not called anyone from her former life, not to gloat, not to explain, not to check whether Dom had finally stopped calling. She had simply worked. The financial press had run their initial stories, the inheritance, the collapsed wedding, the quiet woman nobody saw coming, and when no follow-up quotes arrived, no publicist responded, no carefully managed narrative emerged, they did what the press always does with silence. They filled it with speculation. Sources close to Miller Holdings suggest the new heir is consolidating quietly. Industry insiders describe a woman who listens more than she speaks. No one we contacted could confirm her next move. That last line was Paige's favorite. She had read it at her desk on a Tuesday morning with her second-hand kettle. She'd kept it, sentiment being what it is, and set the newspaper down with the particular satisfaction of a woman whose greatest advantage has always been that people underestimate what they cannot read. Dom had made that mistake once. The market was about to make it too. And this time, the stakes weren't a marriage. They were a city. If you're not subscribed yet, do it now. Because what Paige does next will make everything you just watched look like the opening act. The first move Paige made wasn't dramatic. That was the point. 3 weeks after the inheritance was formalized, Claire Sutton presented her with a short list of distressed commercial properties currently available for acquisition, assets whose owners were over-leveraged, underperforming, or simply caught on the wrong side of a market shift. Standard portfolio expansion. The kind of thing Alexander Miller had done quietly for decades. Paige reviewed the list for 2 days. She asked precise questions. She requested independent valuations on 4 of the properties and cross-referenced them against Miller Holdings' existing footprint without explanation. Then she circled one. A mixed-use development site in the financial district, partially constructed, financing stalled, the original developer unable to complete. The project had been announced 18 months ago with significant fanfare. Press releases. Architectural renderings. A ribbon-cutting ceremony with a keynote speaker who used words like visionary and generational. The keynote speaker had been Dom. The development was his. Or had been, before 3 consecutive lenders withdrew and the construction timeline collapsed under the weight of promises Dom's capital couldn't keep. The site sat now like an unfinished sentence, steel and scaffolding and the ghost of an ambition that had run out of runway. It was available for a fraction of its projected value. Paige approved the acquisition on a Wednesday afternoon. She signed the offer documents with the same steady handwriting she always used and handed them back to Claire without ceremony. Claire allowed herself one small smile. "Should I notify the seller's attorney directly?" "Yes," Paige said, turning back to the next file. "Don't mention my name yet." She wasn't ready to be seen. Not quite yet. Dom Vane had always been better at recovery than reflection. Within 2 weeks of the wedding collapse, the flowers, the lobby, the unanswered calls, the story that broke across every financial outlet by morning, he had already constructed a new narrative. That was his particular skill, and perhaps his deepest flaw, the ability to reframe disaster as strategy so convincingly that he eventually believed it himself. The wedding, he told people, had been postponed. Not cancelled. Postponed. Tiffany confirmed this when asked, though the confirmation came with a pause that lasted just a half-second too long. He restructured what remained of Vane Capital around 2 smaller deals and a consulting arrangement with a firm whose name carried more prestige than liquidity. He gave another podcast interview, a different show this time, more niche, smaller audience, about resilience in business and the discipline of pivoting without losing vision. He did not mention Paige. He did not mention the inheritance. He did not mention the morning his wedding dissolved into unanswered phones while the flowers wilted in a lobby that belonged to his ex-wife. What he did mention, carefully and with calibrated confidence, was his stalled development site, framing it not as a failure but as a strategic pause, pending the right capital partner. He was, he suggested, in conversations. Things were moving. The vision was intact. He believed, with the faith of a man who has never truly reckoned with himself, that the site could still be saved. He had not yet received notice that it had been sold. The letter was already in the mail. It arrived on a Friday. Dom's assistant, one of 2 remaining, down from 5, brought it in with the morning correspondence, flagged simply as legal, urgent, acquisition notice. Dom was on a call when she set it on his desk. He didn't look at it for 40 minutes. When he did, he read it twice. Miller Holdings, acting through its authorized legal representatives, hereby confirms the completed acquisition of the development site at address redacted for legal processing, previously held under Vane Capital Development LLC. Settlement was finalized as of date. All rights, titles, and interests in the property have transferred in full. The letter was signed by Claire Sutton. Dom sat very still. He knew that name. He had seen it on documents before, across a conference table, in an attorney's office on the 42nd floor, on the day the number 650 billion had landed in the room like a physical object and rearranged everything. He picked up his phone. Called his attorney. Was told, after a brief and uncomfortable conversation, that the sale had been entirely legal, conducted at fair market value, executed cleanly and without challenge. There was nothing to contest. He set the phone down. Outside his window, the city moved the way it always does, indifferent, continuous, unbothered by any single man's reckoning. Somewhere across that skyline, in a tower he now knew she owned, Paige Miller was probably at her desk. Probably already on to the next file. Dom stared at the letter for a long time. For the first time since the dining table, since the pen, since the smirk he hadn't bothered to conceal, he felt something he didn't have a reframe for. Tiffany Amber had built her brand on the premise that she was the main character. It was never stated that directly. Her content was careful, aspirational, the kind of perfectly curated vulnerability that performs authenticity without actually risking anything. She posted about choosing herself, about aligned partnerships, about the courage required to build something real with someone who truly sees you. Her audience had grown during the Dom era. The wedding announcement alone had brought 40,000 new followers in a week. People were invested. They wanted the love story. They wanted the empire. What they were getting instead was a woman trying to hold a narrative together with both hands while the floor shifted beneath her. The studio lease review had never resolved in her favor. Hargrove and Associates had been courteous, precise, and immovable. New ownership, new terms, a revised rate that reflected current market value rather than the below-market arrangement the previous management had allowed. Tiffany had countered. The counter was declined. She had 30 days to decide. Her brand partnerships were watching. 2 had already quietly paused renewal conversations. A third had requested updated audience metrics with a specificity that suggested they already knew what they would find. And then someone in the comments, anonymous, thorough, clearly not a casual observer, began posting timelines. The dates of Tiffany's wine nights with Paige. Cross-referenced with flight records showing Dom in the same city as Tiffany on nights he'd told Paige he was traveling for work. Small facts. Verifiable facts. The kind that don't require interpretation. The comments filled fast. Tiffany's phone didn't stop. And somewhere across the city, Paige hadn't posted a single word. She didn't need to. Paige was in a board meeting when Claire passed her the note. She read it once, folded it, and set it beside her water glass without changing her expression. She finished the meeting. She thanked the room. She waited until the last person had left before she asked Claire to close the door. "Tell me the rest," she said. What Claire told her was this: a journalist at a major financial publication, someone with a reputation for accuracy and a particular interest in inheritance law, had been quietly investigating the Alexander Miller estate for 3 weeks. Not Paige's acquisition activity, not the wedding collapse. Something earlier. Something foundational. There was a second heir. Not named in the official documents. Not present at the reading. But a claim had been filed, discreetly, through a separate legal channel, by a man identifying himself as the son of Alexander Miller's estranged second marriage. A marriage no one in Paige's newly inherited world had mentioned. A marriage that, if legitimate, predated the estate designation by a significant margin. The claim had no immediate legal standing. Claire was careful to say that clearly. But it existed. And if the journalist published before Paige's team could fully assess the documentation, the story would shift, from quiet heiress outwits unfaithful husband to disputed empire, uncertain heir. Paige sat with this for a long moment. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent as always. "How long do we have?" she asked. 72 hours, Claire said. "Maybe less." Paige nodded slowly. Then we don't wait, she said. We get ahead of it. She reached for her phone, not to call a publicist, not to call an attorney. She called the journalist directly. The journalist's name was Renata Cole. She had been covering estate law and inherited wealth for 11 years, and in that time she had developed a finely calibrated instinct for when a source was managing her versus trusting her. Most people, when they discovered she was investigating them, called their lawyers. The lawyers called her lawyers. Everyone performed caution for 6 weeks and nothing useful was said. Paige called her directly at 4:17 in the afternoon and said, "I think you've been looking into something I'd rather discuss openly than read about secondhand. Are you available tomorrow morning?" Renata was available. They met in Paige's office, not a conference room, not a neutral location chosen for optics, but Paige's actual desk, with a second-hand kettle and the east-facing window and the stacked document binders that told the story of a woman who had done her homework. Paige offered coffee. Renata accepted. They sat down. Paige spoke for 40 minutes without notes. She confirmed the second marriage. She confirmed the claim. She laid out, with the same steady precision she brought to everything, exactly what her legal team had found in Alexander Miller's private documentation, a clause, buried in the original estate framework, that the senior partners at Hargrove had flagged within days of the inheritance reading. A clause Alexander himself had written, in his own hand, in the final amendment to his will. In the event of any contested claim upon this estate, the designation of sole heir shall be upheld provided the named heir demonstrates active and ethical stewardship within the first 90 days of inheritance. Paige slid a summary document across the desk. 31 days in. She was already ahead of schedule. Renata looked up from the document. "You knew this was coming," she said. Paige picked up her coffee. "I knew something was always coming," she said. "That's why you don't stop moving." The story Renata Cole published was not the story Dom had been hoping for. He had known about the second heir claim, had learned of it through a contact in the legal community 2 weeks prior and had made, in the privacy of his own strategic mind, a calculation. If the claim succeeded, or even created sufficient legal uncertainty, Paige's control of the estate would be challenged. Frozen assets. Disputed holdings. The kind of institutional paralysis that creates opportunities for people positioned correctly on the outside. He had quietly made contact with the claimant's legal team. Not as a party to the dispute. Simply as an interested observer. Someone who understood the properties in question. Someone who might be useful, in an advisory capacity, should the matter require someone with on-the-ground knowledge of the assets. He had been careful. He had been, he believed, invisible. He was neither. Renata Cole's piece ran on a Thursday morning under the headline, "The Miller Inheritance: How One Woman Turned a Betrayal into a Blueprint." It was thorough, precise, and deeply reported. It covered the inheritance, the 31 days of quiet acquisition, the stewardship clause, and Paige's decision to get ahead of the contested claim by speaking on record. It also contained, in the 14th paragraph, 3 sentences about a third party who had made contact with the claimant's legal team. The party was not named. But the description was specific enough. By noon, Dom's remaining business partners had seen it. By 2 o'clock, the consulting arrangement he'd secured had requested a pause in their engagement. By 4, his attorney was calling, not with strategy, but with concern. Dom sat in his office, the one whose lease had already been terminated, whose boxes were half-packed in the corner, and stared at his phone. He had miscalculated. Again. The comments section of Renata Cole's article became, by Friday morning, a document of its own. People had been watching. That was the thing Dom and Tiffany had never fully understood about performing a life publicly, the audience remembers. The podcast interviews about resilience. The Instagram posts from rented penthouses. The caption that said "Unbothered" posted 4 hours after a lease review notice arrived. The wedding announcement made before the divorce ink was dry. People had been cataloging, cross-referencing, quietly assembling a picture that neither Dom nor Tiffany had realized was being assembled. By Friday afternoon, the story had moved beyond the financial press. Tiffany's brand partnerships began issuing statements, carefully worded, expressing the need to reassess alignment and review ongoing commitments. 2 ended the same day. A third, in what appeared to be a spectacular failure of timing, posted a sponsored collaboration with Tiffany at 11 a.m. and deleted it by 1 p.m. after the comments became unusable. Dom gave no statement. His attorney advised against it, and for once Dom listened. The unfinished development site, now a Miller Holdings acquisition, was photographed by a real estate correspondent who included it in a visual timeline of Dom's professional collapse. The scaffolding looked different in photographs than it had in the architectural renderings. Smaller. More exposed. Through all of it, Paige said nothing publicly. She didn't need to. Renata's piece had said everything that needed saying, in the measured language of documented fact, which is always louder than anything posted in the heat of feeling. By Saturday, Paige Miller was not a footnote in someone else's story. She was the story. And she was just getting started. The 90-day stewardship window closed on a Tuesday. Paige was at her desk, the real one on the 38th floor, with the east-facing window and the second-hand kettle she still hadn't replaced, when Claire Sutton walked in with the final legal confirmation. The contested claim had been reviewed, assessed, and formally dismissed. The stewardship clause had been satisfied. The estate designation was permanent, unambiguous, and closed to further challenge. Claire set the document on the desk. Paige signed it. Same handwriting. Same steadiness. The third time she had signed something that changed her life completely, and perhaps the most important of the three. The first signature had ended a marriage. The second had begun an empire. The third made it permanent. She set the pen down and looked out at the city for a long moment. The skyline she now understood differently than she had 90 days ago, not as backdrop but as inventory. The towers and the hotels and the studios and the unfinished site that was already under new construction, scaffolding replaced with purpose, moving forward at a pace Dom's vision had never managed. She thought about the dining table. The envelope. The pen that had rolled out beside the divorce papers like an afterthought. The smirk. Too ordinary. She thought about her grandfather's journal. She does not beg. She does not perform. She simply endures with a dignity most people abandon by 40. She had not abandoned it. She picked up her coffee, turned back to her desk, and opened the next file. There were 3 new acquisition proposals. A development opportunity in a second city. A partnership inquiry from a firm she had been watching for months. Paige Miller had not finished. She had barely begun. To everyone who watched from the beginning, through the dining table, the ivory suit, the wedding morning, the 72-hour countdown, and the final signature, thank you. Genuinely. You stayed, and that means something. The best stories aren't about the loudest moment. They're about the person who kept going after everyone assumed they were finished. Paige kept going. We hope you will too. A new story is coming. A different woman. A different betrayal. The same truth. Patience is the most powerful thing a person can carry. Subscribe, so you don't miss it. We'll see you there.